there's this huge push to save the planet, cow farts are boiling the ocean or some other sort of nonsense. But I mean, regardless, it still makes sense to continue to improve the processes that we do that. Have you looked into methanogenesis? Does this affect the methanogenic bacteria in their gut? Are we seeing a reduction in sort of methane release?
Yes, for us, it's incredibly noticeable. We take cattle off of feed, and then we'll take them off of the hydroponic feed for like 2 weeks. Then we'll come in, we'll put them solely on the hydroponic feed, and there's zero bloat. So we know that the methane production is less by a lot.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys. We have looks like the McCaffertys here. We got a couple of them, looks like. Well, welcome. Thank you guys for being here. First of all, I want to say thank you for doing what you do. Anytime I have an opportunity to thank people for feeding me or feeding us in general, I take the opportunity to do that because I think you folks are far too underappreciated. So with that out of the way, welcome. You guys are in Montana, correct?
Yeah, central Montana.
What's near central Montana? I've been I lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming for a few years. I went to Montana a few times, but I can't remember. I remember Billings was on one side of the state, and you got Big Sky and some of the other stuff on the other side of the state. What's the biggest city around you, if there is such a thing in Montana?
Yeah, Great Falls. I think it's around 50,000 people, and we're south about 40 miles of Great Falls.
And you guys have been there, I guess it sounds like your family's been on the ranch for, 100 years or so, something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, my great-grandfather on my mom's side was here in 1876 in the area. On my dad's side, 1903. And then on this particular ranch since 1926.
Yeah, so coming up on 100 years, that's wonderful. That's amazing. Well, tell me just because you guys do some stuff that's a little unique. I was reading a little bit about that. It's kind of interesting. I'll talk about this in a second, but I ran into somebody who's talking about just exactly what you guys are doing. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been up to.
I guess from my perspective, in the 80s, the ranching community is kind of going through some rough times, and I ended up had to leave the ranch for income. Ended up going into nuclear medicine technology and worked in healthcare for 25 years. And then after that, we sold everything we had, sold our stock, sold our homes, sold everything, and had the opportunity to buy this ranch in 2003. In about 2012, I saw my first hydroponic plant. And as soon as I saw it, I could see that this grain is being sprouted to a grass, and the first thought came to me is maybe we could produce a grass-fed product that tasted good, was healthy, nutritious, and put us down the road to hydroponics. In 2016, we started our adventure, started our own branded beef program, and we wanted to produce a product that tasted good, that was healthy, and that could kind of compete with grain, because grass-fed, we felt, I hope I don't hurt anybody's feelings, but we thought grass-fed didn't probably marble the best, wasn't the most consistent product out there. And so we wanted to be able to compete with a grain-fed product. And in Montana, 99% of the beef is shipped out of Montana. It goes to the Midwest, fed on corn and feedlots. We saw an opportunity where ranchers could go ahead and feed out their cattle here, and try to get their own markets and generate some more income for the ranch.
Yeah, and that's sort of the model for the entire U.S. You produce it. We've got 700,000 individual ranches, roughly, and most of them are relatively small, and they send everything off to the feedlots in Kansas and Nebraska, where the grain grows, basically, and so that's concentrated there. And it's interesting, you mentioned the inconsistent with grass-finished beef, and I eat a lot of beef of all types, and I've had some grass-finished beef what I thought was quite good, but likewise, I've had some that I was like, man, this doesn't really taste all that good to me, and so there is that problem with figuring out how to finish right. So for the people that aren't familiar with what hydroponics means, what exactly does hydroponics mean? My understanding is you grow everything in water, basically, but what is Can you expand upon that a little more?
Yeah, so we take barley and we just water barley in our hydroponic plant, and it sprouts into a nice grass sprout, and then we feed a ration of that every day to our cattle. And so that's where the consistency comes in, is even when it's -50 out in February, our cattle are getting fresh green sprouts, and they don't skip a beat. So the inconsistency with grass finished beef comes in. If you're getting a beef that was finished through the winter months, they're eating that dried hay, and there's just not the nutrients, there's not the protein in that dried hay product. So the cattle just maintain their weight, they're not gaining. And so with the hydroponic feed, those sprouts, it's high in protein, high in macro and micronutrients. They're able to gain weight, gain fat. They don't have as much visceral fat compared to corn or grain finished beef, but the marbling is still pretty darn good, and it competes very well with the grain finished beef.
Yeah, one of my and I literally had a discussion with another gentleman who's looking into hydroponics, or they're investing in hydroponics. And one of the things they point out to me is because a sprout tends to be more nutrient dense compared to the full stalk, they actually produce less methane because there's less sort of indigestible material and more nutrition. So one of the reasons we go on grain is because it's high energy dense, and these sprouts are relatively energy dense relative to a more finished out product. Like he said they wanted to do it before they started any significant photosynthesis. It's just you do the sprouts when they're early on. Is that what you guys are doing as well?
Yeah, yep. There's no light required for the sprouts to go. So at 6 days, you still don't need any light or heat or anything. You just need the sprout or the grain in the water, and it sprouts great. And yeah, the digestibility, we can, as ranchers, we know that it's a highly digestible, highly utilized feed in the animal because there's no cases of bloat in the animal. If you were just to go feed a cow a pile of grain and they've never been on grain before, they would bloat and die. On these sprouts, you could throw out as much sprouts as you wanted to that animal. They will never bloat. They don't get sick. So it's very easy on their digestive systems, and therefore it's, I think, absorbed better, utilized better in the animal, and the animals just look really, really healthy on it.
Is this primarily just a finishing ration, or are they on it, from day one? Are they grazing on grass for 6-8 months and then they go into the sprouts, or how do you mix that in?
The beautiful thing about it is we can do either or. We can feed it exactly like they do in feedlots. You can put a young calf on it and take them clear till 1,450 pounds, or you can go ahead and put them in at 900. Our gains are very similar to corn, and our cost of gains. So the cost is we're very inefficient because we're small compared to like a major feedlot in the Midwest. And our cost of gains are right there at the same as theirs. So we think that our efficiencies, when they get better, we're going to have a lot less cost of gain into the animal than even in the feedlot. So we think it's very efficient. It's very sustainable. Our water usage is incredibly low. We're designing a hydroponic system, and our water usage is 0.3 gallons per pound is what we're using. And I think most hydroponic systems, which are very efficient, are around 10 gallons per pound. So there's some really exciting things going on in hydroponics, and we think it's going to be a real sustainable option for a lot of ranches.
Yeah, and you mentioned protein, but my correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is, cows fatten up on carbohydrate. And so are they carbohydrate rich as well? I assume they are.
Yes. Yep. They very much are. All we're doing is changing that starch to a sugar. So they have really all the power of the grain. If it was dry, that dry barley, there's more energy. You get down into the weeds, into the nutritionist talk here, but total digestive nutrients and things like that. There's more energy into that hydroponic feed than is if you fed it dry.
Yeah, there's a question from one of our Charlie out here. He's asking, I mean, do they like it? Are they like, is this something they go for? Or are they reluctant to eat it?
They will choose the hydroponics over cake. Like they attack the feed. They love it. And again, one of the big things is, as we all are aware, is there's this huge push to save the planet. Cow farts are boiling the ocean or some other sort of nonsense. But I mean, regardless, it still makes sense to continue to improve the processes that we do that. Have you looked into methanogenesis? Does this affect the methanogenic bacteria in their gut? Are we seeing a reduction in sort of methane release?
Yes, for us, it's incredibly noticeable. So we reached out to Montana State University. We haven't heard back from that. We would love a university study done on it. But we've done every type of test to, absolutely, it would kill any cattle on grain. We take cattle off of feed, and then we'll take them off of the hydroponic feed for like 2 weeks. Then we'll come in, we'll put them solely on the hydroponic feed for like 5 days. It is all they can eat, and there's zero bloat. So we know that the methane production is less by a lot. And they digest, you can just tell in the digestion, of the animal and their feces and everything that, it's a perfect product for cattle. Well, cattle were designed to eat grass. And basically we're taking that barley, we're sprouting it, it turns into grass. And so the cattle react on it just exactly like they do grass. We haven't found any difference at all.
And you said your daily gain is equivalent. So is it like 4 or 5 pounds a day? Are they gaining? What are they gaining typically on this?
We can get it up to 4 pounds a day. We, there's a science in that also. And, but we're really putting our cattle on a ration that gains at about 3 pounds a day. But we can push them if we wanted to, and you give them less fiber. We mix the barley with straw, so it's a free byproduct basically of a grain. And so we mix it with straw just to give them some fiber. So we can add more hydroponic feed and less fiber, and then we can increase the gains, their daily gains. But we're pretty certain that we can gain right there with grain. Does your program qualify for the USDA grading system? Can you grade out in prime and stuff like that? Choice and prime, is that stuff you guys are seeing? Yes, we don't do it professionally because you need professional graders, and we're trying to keep everything local. So we're going to local USDA plants. They don't have a professional grader. And then we're going into local butcher shops, and they don't have a professional grader. But our butcher shop in Great Falls that we co-op with, he says we're in that 10 to 15% primes. 90% are choice plus. Yeah, that's great. That's because you can look at it. You don't necessarily need a professional grader to look at it kind of and say that thing's got decent marbling in there. So the hydroponic facility, obviously there's a cost associated with building that, and there's an operation cost. How many head of cattle do you have, and how much hydroponic space you need to support those guys? We have 700 mother cows with 200 to 400 yearlings. And we have a 40 by 60 building. And we could supply out of that building, we could maintain every one of those cattle out of our building. Now, when we're pushing them and trying to go to the very last stage in the animal's life, we take more of the hydroponic feed and go into those yearlings. So, but just maintaining cattle, you can maintain out a 40 by 60 building easy, 1,000 head a day. Yeah, it's not very much space. 40 by 60. I mean, my house is bigger than that. I think I'm thinking about the amount of land required, and so that's compared to. And you're saying you could, like, if you were to feed them from weaning or even just basically weaning onto fat cattle,
Could you do that with that much room, or would you need a little bit more for that sort of situation?
Yeah, we would need a little more to do 1,000 head. We can probably do around, I think it's around 600 a year fattening out of that 40 by 60 building.
That's not much space, because when we talk, because one of the concerns is, cattle take up all this extra land and so on and so forth. So that cuts down on land usage. And explain to me the water again. You said a third of a pound or 0.3 gallons per pound. Is that pound of sprouts produced, or is it a pound of beef yield, or what is that? What is the one pound?
Yeah, it's sprouts produced.
Okay.
And and like in our case, we have water that comes out of the mountain. It runs, gravity flows right into our building. It goes onto our barley product. And then the water that's wasted or not used goes down a drain and goes into a water trough. And then the cattle use it there in the water trough. So there's virtually zero water waste. There's so it's incredibly water efficient.
And what's the feed efficiency look like? I mean, we hear a lot of things around, 6 kilos per kilo of beef, or 4, depending on, I think some 4. What? How much food you got to get them for them to gain a pound or a kilo?
Yeah, we're getting, let's say, we're getting 3 pounds a day, and that's based on 24 pounds of barley sprouts per day. So 24 pounds of barley sprouts is getting us 3 to 4 pounds of gain a day.
So about 8 to 1, something like that. And you're using, and the water you're utilizing, well, what about what's the waste situation from the sprouts look like? You have, when the sprouts finish germinating in the water, do you have to replace the water or get rid of the water? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, the water is just flowing into the building, goes right onto the sprout. And then the sprout soaks up a percentage of that water. And so the plant uses a percentage of it. And then the water that it doesn't capture, it goes right into our water troughs. There's no chemicals used. There's no fertilizers. It's just water and seed. And so the water can go right back into the creek. It can go right back into a water trough. And we find that to be very helpful.
And that water is very nutrient rich water as well. So it's high in sugars, high in nutrients. So it's kind of a useful tool to use as well.
It's kind of like Gatorade for the animals, and they have a little extra bonus. Yeah, and I guess so. You said no herbicides, no pesticides really needed at all, right? Correct for this feed. That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, that seems like a big win-win. What are the hurdles for scalability on this? I mean, what does it take to go from 40 by 60 to 400 by 600? What's the concern with that?
It's amazing. That's the part we're really excited about. We have a partner that we partnered with in building these hydroponic systems, and we can produce. We've quoted a building at 1 million pounds a day coming out of a building. I can't remember exactly the footprint of the building offhand. But it is very, very space efficient. It's water efficient. Electrical use is really, really low. And out of that 1 million pounds a day, you could feed like over 30,000 head a day, fattening cattle.
What is the temperature requirements? Is there an HVAC requirement for the sprout? They have to be held within a certain temperature range?
There is. We like that portion of it also. We are in an area that'll get 20, 30, 40 below with 60 mile an hour winds. And it is hard to heat the building when that happens, because you're bringing in cold air and you're evacuating heat out and humidity. So we use wood and backup propane. And so that's what we use. The HVAC system is an important portion of the hydroponic plant. Mold is the biggest issue.
I mean, will the sprouts die below a certain temperature if it gets below, obviously the water freezes ain't going to work, but if it's 50 to 40 degrees, is it okay for the sprouts, or does it have to be 70 all the time?
Yeah, no, we're sprouting it even at 48 degrees in the building. And it works best at like 60 degrees. And sometimes, so we've got a big variability that we sprout it in. But it does sprout at, 55 degrees. It depends on your grain and when it'll sprout. Like corn, we could sprout, but corn needs a little more temperature to sprout. So, but this barley will sprout at 48 to 55 degrees.
Yeah, I was going to ask you why you selected barley, because there seems like there's a whole bunch of things you could do sprouts on. I mean, I know there's peas and beans and grass sprouts and all that stuff. Have you played with the different types of sprouts to see if it changed the characteristics of the finished product? Or
yes, we have, and we've then we test it nutritionally with our nutritionist, and we go to barley because it's that's what we produce in Montana. There's a ton of barley being produced here, and it was the cheapest feed that actually had all the nutrients that we felt that we needed. There's malt barley plants around here, so they're making a lot of beer up here, and then they reject it because of it has too high of a protein content to make beer. And so it's a really readily available, cheap feed source. But that's why we use barley. But yeah, we've sprouted wheat, peas, corn, barley, oats. But barley seems to work the best in our environment. But yeah, you can then sprout anything.
And just, you said cheap feed, and I don't know what feed costs are. I'm not a rancher. I can only guess. But I mean, so what is a kilo of barley sprouts cost, or whatever unit you like to use that a rancher might understand?
We were purchasing it, since 2016 to about a year ago, we were right at an average of $4 a bushel, which a bushel is 48 pounds. But recently everything's gone crazy. So we're up in that $8 to $10 a bushel currently. We think that it's going to come right back down to historical averages soon, we hope. But yeah, it's a little high right now.
And so one bushel of 48 pounds of sprouts yields how much actual sprouted barley product?
Yeah, 48 pounds. That is one of the kind of the nuances of hydroponics. Some people measure it out to 7 days and they get a lot more pounds, but they're not getting any more nutrition. So we always go by dry grain. So that we can get an honest evaluation of how much dry grain does it cost to produce a pound. So we think that it, probably 1 pound of barley will produce, in that typical hydroponic system, 6 pounds of product that comes out. But really, you only have the nutritional value of that 1 pound of grain. It's mainly water that's added onto that. So,
what and you sprout them for how long? 3 days, 5 days, 7 days? What's the sprouting time before you're ready to feed?
It starts sprouting, really instantly, and we've been currently feeding it at 6 days. But you could go a little, the better your sprouting operation, the quicker you can feed it out there. And so a person has the ability to go ahead and, get their nutritionist, test the feed and see what's best for their cattle and go at whatever day they really prefer. But most systems are right in that 6-7 days.
Yeah, and there's a question about, the nutrient medium. Is it just straight up water? There's no other things you got to add to the sprouts? Just plain old water?
Yeah, and not even sunlight, just water and barley.
That's amazing. That really is. It sounds like a really exciting. You guys aren't the only ones in the world doing this, I'm sure. Do you know any other folks that have started doing stuff like this?
Yeah, there's different. I think on smaller scales, it's starting to get more popular, and there's starting to be more interest in it. And I think here pretty soon there's going to be people a lot bigger than us. But I think back in 2016, we were one of the biggest ones that started feeding out cattle on it. But it's definitely picking up speed.
Yeah, there's got to be neighbor ranches next to you guys. Half of Montana's a ranch, right? And so I'm like, yep. Are any of your fellow ranchers around you looking at what you're doing and say, hey, what's the story on this, and thinking about trying it, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, they really are. When we designed our system, we saw our first hydroponic system, and it was a horrible system. So we thought we could do better, and I guess maybe we did. So we built our first system in 2016, but it was a labor-intensive nightmare. We had all sorts of issues. We kind of copied the current systems that are out there, but we made it even worse than their systems. And so we totally tore it apart. We met a partner that is a neighbor that built a home up here, but he has some factories in the automotive industry in Midwest and Mexico. And I told him some of the benefits of hydroponics, some advantages and the disadvantages. And then during COVID, their governor in Michigan shut down their whole state. So he just set his engineers loose on the problem, and he designed a system that we think that really answered all of the hydroponic problems. And so that's kind of, so my neighbors saw my system and they said they didn't want no part of it because the labor was just insane. But now they're seeing my new system, and yes, we're getting a lot of interest in how we're doing it now.
How do you, and there's a question about, the plants, gravity is going to affect, usually plants have to grow. Is there like a trellis or something they have to grow on, or how do you get them to sprout in the right direction?
They're just about this tall. It looks like turf or sod. So it's just the sprouts are about that tall. And then you got a root mass that's about that thick. And so it just looks like when you see people rolling out sod, that's what what it looks like.
And you feed them the roots as well. I mean, that's nutritious.
That's where the nutrients are.
Yeah.
There's really nothing in the green grass portion of it. There's no nutrients. It's just all for show. And all the money, so to speak, is in the root mass.
I see. Okay. And then as far as, how much acreage do you need for cattle then? How much grazing land could you get away with? If you say a typical cow requires, depending on what state you're in, one cow needs 4 acres or 2 acres, depending on how it is. What could you conceivably see as far as I had 100 acres, how many head of cattle could I put on there with a hydroponic system?
It's however tight you really want to put the cattle in there. So most guys that are kind of looking at doing this have, we're land rich, so to speak, in Montana. So you could put them, on a few hundred acres and have 1,000 head, and it would look like an enormous amount of land compared to the Midwest. And the cattle would have a lot of room. But yeah, you don't need productive lands. And Montana has a lot of rocky land and rocky soil. It doesn't produce hardly any grass. When Lewis and Clark came through here, they said they didn't think part of Montana would ever be inhabited, and it's still holding true. So, but that type of land, if you have water, and a lot of that country does, you could have it in deserts. If you got water, you could raise an enormous amount of cattle. You just need a grain source to source your grain, and water and grain, and that's all you need. And you can do it on really cheap, poor quality soil.
Yeah, the barley sprouts that you're getting have to come from somewhere, correct? So there is a land cost to produce the barley.
Yep.
Do you know how much relative land you're utilizing from a barley acreage to do what you're doing?
Yeah, that is a great question. And that varies on the land, of course. Around here, I think, they're getting between 40 bushels to 80 bushels an acre. So that, and we have no, we're not farmers, we're just cowboys. So we just run cattle, and then we buy from local farmers the grain. But that is a cost. But we plug in around, like I said, our average cost is $4 a bushel. And it probably costs you around $2.50 to $3 to produce it yourself. If you have the land and you have the farm and all that. So yeah, you would need 40 bushels would maintain, 1 bushel will maintain 5 cows. So 40 times 5, 200 per acre on the low side.
And that's per day, or is that per lifetime to slaughter?
Yep, per day.
Per day. Okay. Interesting. And I mean, any interest in this sort of technique from things like NCBA or North American Meat Institute or any of the U.S. cattlemen's, or has anybody sort of reached out to you guys and said, hey, what's the deal here? Let's 20x this or 1000x this to the rest of our cattle operations.
You know, Shawn, you're our maiden voyage here, really. We haven't talked to anybody. We wanted to produce a hydroponic plant. We felt that there are some major problems in the hydroponic world, and we wanted to produce a plant that could supply, huge amounts economically of this fodder. And so we've really been concentrating on that. And we thought if we could solve that problem, then we could solve what we thought are some major problems in the industry after that. And we think that we've done that now. My system that I got installed was just a couple of weeks ago. And so I have the very first system of it. And we've got a lot of interest, but no sales so far on the rest. And but we're really excited on the production part of it, because we knew that it's a tremendous feed. It's a very unique, high quality, healthy. We think the health benefits, you can't get healthier. We don't think. Not that we think that there's any unhealthy beef. Don't get me wrong. But when we started, we knew that there was a push for sustainability, the low methane thing, the open spaces to raise cattle in. We wanted to produce something that the public would accept. And so that's kind of how we got started, was to produce the best tasting, highest quality beef that you can produce, and do it at a cost that, ranchers could do it in. And we think we're really close to accomplishing that.
The water requirements for the hydroponics, how does that compare to, say, traditional cattle, cow-calf off the feedlot? Do you have any comparison on the numbers on water utilization?
We don't. That's a hard one. And we've got some guys in our industry that are trying to figure out that number. We know that like growing grass on the hillside is a pretty inefficient process. So we're better than Mother Nature is as far as pounds per, amount of water. And but as far as like what feedlots are using and stuff like that, I don't have any comparison, to that.
Do you, I was in Southern California, a friend of mine, a rancher out there in Orange Beach, saying drought is just killing them this year or the last few years. Is it something that's drought resistant, I guess? I mean, could you go in a place like New Mexico, California, and Mexico, and assume you had some access to water, you think you could solve some of the drought issues with this?
Yeah, so here in Montana, the last couple of years, we've had pretty severe drought. It still looks green out and stuff, but we're in a bad drought right now. We got like 400 bales of hay this year, where we normally get 3,000 to 5,000 bales of hay. So we're in a pretty bad drought. So that's one of the reasons that we started this hydroponic plant. And then one of the main reasons that we are starting to manufacture and sell these new hydroponic systems we've designed is to help these ranches that are they're going out of business because of drought. Eastern Montana is a really good example of that. We think that if ranchers take that leap of faith to invest in some of these hydroponic plants, they could literally save their ranches, because they're going to make it more productive, more profitable. And you're taking away these variabilities that we're always dealing with, such as drought, cattle markets, grain market. We're taking away all of that, instability, and creating something that you can rely on for production and profit.
You mentioned earlier that, the initial version of your hydroponic was a manpower nightmare, and you said there's some problems with hydroponics, and you've solved some. What are some of the potential problems with hydroponics, and then what were your solutions to those?
Some of that is kind of our intellectual properties that we're trying to kind of keep on a down low for a little bit here. But yeah, the mold is a tremendous problem in hydroponics because you're putting water into an environment that can't handle the mold. So that was probably, I would say, our biggest problem. And then production, to be able to produce a large amount, enough to make a difference. We found out that I had to, for me to buy our beef was more expensive because of the inefficiencies. I couldn't compete with grain fed on a cost basis because our labor was just atrocious. So when we first started, we didn't really plug in labor. I just didn't imagine it to be that bad. And it turned into it was. And so that drove our costs up in production in order to produce that feed.
Well, we were it's a typical vertical hydroponic layout. We were pulling over 10,000 pounds of fodder every day. When we first started, we didn't even have a conveyor in the building. So we'd pull out this 10,000 pounds worth of fodder. We'd load it into wheelbarrows, wheelbarrow it out the building, throw it onto the back of the truck, drive the truck back out, throw it off the truck, come back. And so, yeah, we were in there 24 hours a day doing that. So that was the worst of the worst, was being in there all day.
The cleaning of it is mold would be the biggest answer to your question. And cattle do really bad on mold. In fact, you can make your whole herd sick, which I did. And it was very costly because I had to treat them with antibiotics to save their life, which we're an all natural program. So then I had to sell the cattle to, the regular system. They had to go down to the Midwest and go through the kill plants that way.
And I guess the hydroponic systems you're designing and I assume selling to other people, are you manufacturing it for them and then transporting, you're building on site, or how does that go? And what is, just for somebody who's looking at, what is the cost typically for, I don't know, whatever typical size of hydroponic facility you'd have? Yeah,
their range is huge because of but it's all based on production. We have a small version, that'd probably be around 500,000. And we've quoted them up over, a few $1 million. And it's just, but it'd be in that range. And, but you can feed a tremendous amount of cattle with that. And when you're looking at ranchers' costs, our equipment, like swathers and balers and our tractors, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but when banks are actually involved in dollar cost averaging it, and they're very excited for the agriculture industry to look at this as an option instead of going the way we've been doing business.
What are the limitations on scaling of this? Is it water accessibility? Is it access to the grain sprouts? What would limit our ability to scale this on a national massive level?
There's really no stopping it, really. It would be grain production, having access to grain. Whereas really the banks have kind of thought that it's really penciling out, and we do too, is if you have the farm and the hydroponic system and the cattle, if you have processing close for the cattle, you can really compete, I think, with on a personal level. I think that, these huge corporations are maybe kind of scary for our food supply. And we have really 3 packers, maybe 4 that are processing almost all of our beef. And if we can just change that by 5 to 10%, I think it would make a huge difference in the cattle industry. And it would shore up our supply chain issues that we have. So I'm a big proponent of these smaller processing plants, locally raised beef. I really think it's important for the consumer to be able to know how their cattle is raised, and they can choose. Do they want Wagyu? And then they talk to a Wagyu guy. Do they want grain fed? Do they want grass fed? In our case, do you want sprout fed? and get to know what's in your beef, what's in the feed, and take a little more responsibility. And I think ranchers would step up and produce whatever the public really, really wants. That's why we appreciate, Shawn, what you're doing so much. We don't have a spokesperson really in the beef industry. We think the world of you and what you're doing.
Well, it's my pleasure, and like I said, I think I more appreciate what you guys are doing, and particularly pushing the envelope a little bit and seeing what's possible. Do you know, as far as you guys ship, you guys are direct to consumer? I guess you guys do box beef to whoever wants it. Is it throughout the country or just in Montana, or what's your business model right now?
Yeah, we ship nationwide right now. I just started doing that earlier this year. And then we sell bulk beef mostly in Montana. But yeah, pretty much anywhere I can get you some beef.
What is the breed you guys run? Is it Angus, or is it what is the cattle that you're utilizing? And I guess it doesn't matter for sprouts. Any
Right.
cattle would run on sprouts,
Yep.
I assume.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Shawn. And there's no bad cattle, so to speak. But we do a Sim Angus cross. We have a seed stock producer that really is focused on carcass. And so in order to have good beef, you have to have a really good seed stock producer. And so that's why we lined up with, the breed that we're in. And, but yeah, you're right. You can produce on hydroponics, there's good cattle in every breed. And so
But one way we've been really working is we're at that 10 to 15% prime on sprout finished beef. We want to get into that 80% prime. So we've recently started genetic testing all of our calves.
80% finish on prime.
I'm going for 30%.
I was going to say 80% would be pretty. That would make a lot of people jealous for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's where the genetic testing comes in. And so we're going to be getting all the carcass data back on every animal. And so those that score high in the marbling, there's some, is it tryptophan tests, or there's some new testing out for the eating experience. And so we're genetic testing on all of that. So everything that scores high in those areas are going into our feedlot. Because only a portion of our cattle go into our feedlot, the rest get sold conventionally. So we'll be utilizing all of those genetics, the DNA testing to get the best carcass animals into our feedlot.
And then we sell the ones that are not as high a potential to go prime, we sell those into the Midwest. So they go out the conventional way. But to our customers, we think that we can double our primes. And we'll see if that happens. But yeah, we are excited about the DNA testing portion of our business.
That's awesome. Question for you. There's a couple questions that people asked. One was just again about the water. Is there a flow rate is it a standing water? Is it gently flowing water? How do you control the water in egress and ingress to the sprouts?
Yeah, on our system, we have water that comes out of the mountain above our house. We capture it right out of a spring, and it just goes into a pipe right into our hydroponic system. And I think we're at around, and my son-in-law, who's an engineer, knows all these numbers, and he's not here, but I think we're around 30 gallons a minute or something like that, which is way more water than what we use. To do 10,000 pounds of sprouts a day, we're, 800 gallons max. And then we recapture any water waste. So it's even, it's less than that.
That sounds pretty interesting. And I don't know if you've done this. There's a question one of my friends Steven's asking about metabolomic analysis of the feed, of the food. Have you analyzed your beef in a high level way to see what vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients show up in the beef yet? Has that been done?
That's where we've been trying to work with getting into a university study to get that kind of information back. But just visually, when you're looking at the animals, I always tell people it's like you're looking at the athlete version of a cow. So just by our own ranching, tests, we know that this beef is as healthy as they come, and that we believe that that's translated into the beef product. But no, we haven't gotten any official tests finished on that yet.
Yeah, no, I was going to say there's somebody at University of Utah, Stephen Van Vliet, who's doing some metabolomic analysis of different beef for, raised on, regenerative systems. So it might be interesting to reach out to him at some point if you'd be willing to analyze a collection of your beef. But that would be interesting. So, I don't know how many acres. I can't remember how many acres you guys said you had. Are you planning on expanding your operation? Is that something, obviously it takes a while to expand a beef herd, but is that buy more land or just put more animals on the same patch of land?
What our real goal was when we started was to get really the ability, and ranching is a dying business. All the old guys, I'm young in ranching terms, which is scary because I'm almost 60. And so the old guys are staying on the ranch and they're going till they're like 80. And so their kids don't really have an opportunity to be raised in it and to make any money out of it. So they leave. And then by the time they come back, they're 50, they get the ranch willed to them or whatever. And, but they're 50 and they don't want to start a new career. And so then the ranch sells, and it's going to, either hunting, it's going to subdivisions, or it's going into, a richer person that really isn't, their main industry isn't agriculture. And so the land is disappearing, and we wanted to go ahead and have an alternative income for the next generation coming in. So we're really not interested in expanding. We're wanting to stay here for the next couple generations. And so that's why we did it. And that's why we went to the branded beef program. And water usage, there's a water shortage really happening worldwide. As the population grows, we're taking more water, and the cities are taking more water, and less water is being going to agriculture. So it's more of a sustainability reason why we did it. So we're not planning on expanding, but we want to expand to have another stream of income coming in.
Yeah, if ranchers are interested in purchasing one of your systems, how do they get a hold of you? And if somebody wants to buy your, just try your beef, how do they do that?
So we have a website, it's McCaffertyRanch.com. And so basically all of our information and everything you need to purchase beef from us is on there. And for these systems, like we said, we just got the first one installed at our place, but he's the one that anyone who's interested in purchasing a system would talk to, and just call him. Our number's on our website as well. So that's how we would do, how you get a hold of us.
And as far as the system, but what do you anticipate the build time is for, and again, I don't know, the sizes obviously are going to dictate that, but how long could if somebody contacts you tomorrow and says, hey guys, I want to set up a hydroponic system for my 1,000 head of cattle, what's the turnaround time that you anticipate to be?
We're, for our equipment, not their building, that's kind of on their end, the building side of it, but we're about 26 weeks out.
26 weeks out on the build time or
on the equipment. So it would be, if you ordered it, you should have it installed, up and running in 26 weeks if you had the building already built.
And are the buildings critical? Can you put it up in an old barn, or does it have to be some sort of well-designed, sealed building, or how does that work?
It definitely helps if you're going to design it right. I put mine in an existing building, so you can put it in an existing building. If my building would have been like 10 feet longer and 8 feet wider, I could have doubled the production out of my plant. So it does help to talk to our engineers and our designers. And so if they have a 1,000 head operation, they tell us really how quick they want to feed and how many head they want to feed. And then our designers will design them a building for them, and say, this is the square footage that you need to build. This is how it works most efficiently. But yeah, we can put it in almost any building. But it would work definitely better to build your own.
And then is it a problem having the sort of the feeding troughs or feeding area right next to the building, so it's easy to, you said a conveyor and just kind of sprouts right out to the feeding bin, or I'm not even sure what you call it, troughs.
Yes.
Is that doable?
Yes, the way we feed ours is in the wintertime when it's really cold, it goes out into a mixer, a vertical mixer. And like I said earlier, we put straw in it to get the fiber. And then the tractor pulls that mixer. And then we go out to pastures that have no troughs or anything because the ground is hard. And then we just put it out onto the ground and the cattle eat it with no waste. If you were feeding in the springtime, like we do also, we've got some bunk line feeding that we do so that there's no waste and the cattle will come to these bunks, so to speak. But yeah, you need a tractor mixer or a truck and mixer. And if you had a truck, you can travel farther and quicker than a tractor and a mixer. So it kind of depends on your operation and how you want to dispense the feed.
Yeah, and I know you addressed this earlier, but just to reiterate, do your cattle typically graze when they're cow calf on grass, and then they kind of get somehow into the sprout system later on in the scheme?
Yeah, so our mother cows and the calves, they're out on pasture all year long. During the winter months, we feed like our mother cows just hay. But our yearlings that we keep that get moved into the fat program, those are the ones that get put in onto the sprouts, probably about the final 4 months before they are processed. They go into getting fed the hydroponic feed.
And they're always on open pastures. They have one of the reasons why we think our cattle look a lot different than say feedlot cattle is really the exercising that they do. And a lot of feedlots wouldn't like that because you don't get the gains, because they're traveling to water, they're traveling up into the timber. They actually forage on grass and then run out of the timber and run down to where we're feeding, and they come pouring out of there. So they're running, they're exercising. So we don't have, maybe like Megan said earlier, we don't have the fat cap as big, and they are very, very healthy animals. They're at the same weight as like feedlot cattle. We're getting them to like 1,450 pounds. It's just rearranged a little differently than on fat cattle in the Midwest.
The flavor profile, does it taste like barley finished cattle generally, or does the sprouts impart a different flavor to it?
Well, yeah, that's the kind of the biggest concern people get. They're like, does it taste like wild game because it's grass finished? And no, I would describe it, there's a little bit more depth of flavor versus your grain finished beef. There's a hair bit of that barley. But I say it's a really good in between of your grass finished beef and corn finished.
It has a little more like flavor. What people are telling us in taste tests, more flavor than like corn. Where we've got to really work on is the tenderness. So we're working on getting the intermuscular fat, the marbling, at a high enough level that it's really, really tender. And but flavor, we seem to win. Tenderness is why we're really working on getting into those primes. But it is very, very tender product. But I'm just talking about the very best corn fed that you'll eat. We want to be as tender as them.
And when you say you're working on the tenderness or intramuscular marbling, I mean, I know some genetics are going to dictate that, but how do you work on it? I mean, you obviously said they're running around, so maybe you have them staying around more. I don't know. What could you do?
Well, our answer is genetics. We think we're raising the animal and feeding them right. And now we're just going to target the animals that just are predisposed to high marbling. And we think that that's the answer. Right now, just on a random sample of our cattle, we're getting into 10 to 15% prime. So once we target like our 700-800 head, we think that we can get, out of two, and we sell around 200 to 300 a year, that we can get those animals on our ranch and really boost our prime numbers. So that's where we're going to go, is quality through DNA.
No. And we don't really want to reduce the exercising that the animals get, because that's kind of part of our program. That's part of our marketing. We want the healthiest animals possible. I always tell people that we're putting weight on these animals like an athlete would through good diet and exercise, versus if you're looking at the grain finished beef, you're looking at somebody who's putting on weight maybe in an unhealthy way, eating a not so healthy diet and remaining stagnant. And so that's just that's something we're not going to get rid of, because we do want to produce the healthiest beef we possibly can.
Yeah, and then your finishing time, what is it, age of slaughter? 16, 18, 20 months? Where do you guys fall with that?
16 would be at the very earliest, and we go all the way to 30 months. So we keep it under 30 and over 16. We're finding that, like Wagyu, they take longer to feed and they marble incredible. And a lot of that is just they slow grow them, and that introduces more marbling. So we're finding that if we feed them less of a ration, don't push them so hard, it costs a little more money, but you can increase your marbling. So we're trying to hit in that 24 to 30 months really, to get a little more marbling into the animal, and we're doing it slower and doing it at a cost that makes sense.
Yeah, one of our members had beef and it's delicious, and he's put the link there. So I unfortunately have to run. I've got to do some consultations here in about a minute. It is a pleasure talking to you guys. Good luck with what you're doing. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I think I'm going to be in Montana next year. Maybe we'll visit or something like that. But you guys have a great day. Keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Shawn. We appreciate you a lot.
Okay, guys. Take care, guys. I got to go. The rest of you guys, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care now.